Hello, I'm back. It's been a minute. Um, okay, we are on part 5, which is called the epilogue. Something that the dead are keeping back. And it's chapter 19. The two of them were driving the VW bus down to Florida on I-75. They'd been driving since dawn, or rather, Shadow had driven, and Mr. Nancy had sat up front in the passenger seat and from time to time, and with a pained expression on his face, offered to drive. Shadow always said no. "Are you happy?" asked Mr. Nancy suddenly. He had been staring at Shadow for several hours. Whenever Shadow glanced over to his right, Mr. Nancy was looking at him with his earth-brown eyes. "Not really," said Shadow. "But I'm not dead yet." "Huh?" "Call no man happy until he is dead. Herodotus." Mr. Nancy raised a white eyebrow, and he said, "I'm not dead yet, and mostly because I'm not dead yet, I'm happy as a clam boy." "The Herodotus thing. It doesn't mean that the dead are happy," said Shadow. "It means that you can't judge the shape of someone's life until it's over and done." "I don't even judge then," said Mr. Nancy. "And as for happiness, there's a lot of different kinds of happiness, just as there's a hell of a lot of different kinds of dead. Me, I'll just take what I can get when I can get it." Shadow changed the subject. "Those helicopters," he said. "The ones that took away the bodies and the injured. What about them? Who sent them? Where did they come from?" "You shouldn't worry yourself about that. They're like Valkyries or buzzards. They come because they have to come." "If you say so." "The dead and the wounded will be taken care of. You ask me, old Jackal's going to be very busy for the next month or so. Tell me something, Shadow Boy." "Okay. You learn anything from all this?" Shadow shrugged. "I don't know. Most of what I learned on the tree I've already forgotten," he said. "I think I met some people, but I'm not certain of anything anymore. It's like one of those dreams that changes you. You keep some of the dream forever, and you know things down deep inside yourself because it happened to you. But when you go looking for details, they kind of just slip out of your head." "Yeah," said Mr. Nancy. And then he said, grudgingly, "You're not so dumb." "Maybe not," said Shadow. "But I wish I could have kept more of what passed through my hands since I got out of prison. I was given so many things, and I lost them again." "Maybe," said Mr. Nancy, "you kept more than you think." "No," said Shadow. They crossed the border into Florida, and Shadow saw his first palm tree. He wondered if they'd planted it there on purpose at the border, just so that you knew you were in Florida now. And here's the cat. Mr. Nancy began to snore, and Shadow glanced over at him. The old man still looked very gray, and his breath was rasping. Shadow wondered, not for the first time, if he had sustained some kind of chest or lung injury in the fight. Nancy had refused any medical attention. Florida went on for longer than Shadow had imagined, and it was late by the time he pulled outside a small one-story wooden house, its windows tightly shuttered, on the outskirts of Fort Pierce. Nancy, who had directed him through the last 5 miles, invited him to stay the night. "I can get a room in a motel," said Shadow. "It's not a problem." "You could do that, and I'd be hurt. Obviously, I wouldn't say anything, but I'd be real hurt, real bad," said Mr. Nancy. "So you better stay here, and I'll make you a bed up on the couch." Mr. Nancy unlocked the hurricane shutters and pulled open the windows. The house smelled musty and damp and a little sweet, as if it were haunted by the ghosts of long-dead cookies. Shadow agreed reluctantly to stay the night there, just as he agreed even more reluctantly to walk with Mr. Nancy to the bar at the end of the road for just one late-night drink while the house aired out. "Did you see Zernabog?" asked Nancy as they strolled through the muggy Floridian night. The air was alive with whirring palmetto bugs, and the ground crawled with creatures that scuttled and clicked. Mr. Nancy lit a cigarillo and coughed and choked on it. Still, he kept right on smoking. "He was gone when I came out of the cave. He will have headed home. He'll be waiting for you there, you know." "Yes." They walked in silence to the end of the road. It wasn't much of a bar, but it was open. "I'll buy the first beers," said Mr. Nancy. "We're only having one beer, remember," said Shadow. What are you? Asked Mr. Nancy. Some kind of cheapskate? Mr. Nancy bought them their first beers, and Shadow bought the second round. He stared in horror as Mr. Nancy talked the barman into turning on the karaoke machine, and then watched in fascinated embarrassment as the old man belted his way through What's New, Pussycat, before crooning out a moving, tuneful version of The Way You Look Tonight. He had a fine voice, and by the end, the handful of people still in the bar were cheering and applauding him. When he came back to Shadow at the bar, he was looking brighter. The whites of his eyes were clear, and the gray pallor that had touched his skin was gone. Your turn, he said. Absolutely not, said Shadow. But Mr. Nancy had ordered more beers and was handing Shadow a stained printout of songs from which to choose. Just pick a song you know the words to. This is not funny, said Shadow. The world was beginning to swim a little, but he couldn't muster the energy to argue. And then Mr. Nancy was putting on the backing tape to Don't Let Me Be Misunderstood, and pushing, literally pushing Shadow up onto the tiny makeshift stage at the end of the bar. Shadow held the mic as if it was probably live, and then the backing music started, and he croaked out the initial, "Baby." Nobody in the bar threw anything in his direction, and it felt good. "Can you understand me now?" His voice was rough but melodic, and rough suited the song just fine. "Sometimes I feel a little mad. Don't you know that no one alive can always be an angel?" And he was still singing it as they walked home through the busy Florida night, the old man and the young stumbling and happy. "I'm just a soul whose intentions are good," he sang to the crabs and the spiders and the palmetto beetles and the lizards in the night. "Oh, Lord, please don't let me be misunderstood." Mr. Nancy showed him to the couch. It was much smaller than Shadow, who decided to sleep on the floor. But by the time he had finished deciding to sleep on the floor, he was already fast asleep, half sitting, half lying on the tiny sofa. At first he did not dream. There was just the comforting darkness. And then he saw a fire burning in the darkness and walked toward it. "You did well," whispered the Buffalo Man without moving his lips. "I don't know what I did," said Shadow. "You made peace," said the Buffalo Man. "You took our words and made them your own." Hi again. They never understood that they were there. They were here. And the people who worship them were here, because it suits us that they are here. But we can change our minds, and perhaps we will. "Are you a god?" asked Shadow. The buffalo-headed man shook his head. Shadow thought for a moment that the creature was amused. "I am the land," he said. And if there was more to that dream, then Shadow did not remember it. He heard something sizzling. His head was aching, and there was a pounding behind his eyes. Mr. Nancy was already cooking breakfast. A pile of pancakes, sizzling bacon, perfect eggs, and coffee. He looked in the peak of health. "My head hurts," said Shadow. "You get a good breakfast inside you, you'll feel like a new man." "I'd rather feel like the same man, just with a different head," said Shadow. "Eat," said Mr. Nancy. Shadow ate. "How do you feel now?" "Like I've got a headache, only now I've got some food in my stomach and I think I'm going to throw up." "Come with me." Beside the sofa, on which Shadow had spent the night, covered with an African blanket, was a trunk made of some dark wood which looked like an undersized pirate chest. Mr. Nancy undid the padlock and opened the lid. Inside the trunk there were a number of boxes. Nancy rummaged among the boxes. "It's an ancient African herbal remedy," he said. "It's made of ground willow bark, things like that." "Like aspirin?" "Yep," said Mr. Nancy. "Just like that." From the bottom of the trunk he produced a giant, economy-sized bottle of generic aspirin. He unscrewed the top and shook out a couple of white pills. "Here." "Nice trunk," said Shadow. He took the bitter pills, swallowed them with a glass of water. "My son sent it to me," said Mr. Nancy. "He's a good boy. I don't see him as much as I'd like." "I miss Wednesday," said Shadow. "Despite everything he did. I keep expecting to see him, but I look up and he's not there." He kept staring at the pirate trunk, trying to figure out what it reminded him of. "You will lose many things. Do not lose this." Who said that? "You miss him? After what he put you through? Put us all through?" "Yes," said Shadow. "I guess I do." "Do you think he'll be back?" "I think," said Mr. Nancy, "that wherever two men are gathered together to sell a third man a $20 violin for $10,000, he will be there in spirit." "Yes, but We should get back into the kitchen, said Mr. Nancy, his expression becoming stony. Those pans won't wash themselves. Mr. Nancy washed the pans and the dishes. Shadow dried them and put them away. Somewhere in there, the headache began to ease. They went back into the sitting room. Shadow stared at the old trunk some more, willing himself to remember. If I don't go to see Chernobog, he said, what would happen? You'll see him, said Mr. Nancy flatly. Maybe he'll find you, or maybe he'll bring you to him. But one way or another, you'll see him. Shadow nodded. Something started to fall into place. Hey, he said, is there a god with an elephant's head? Ganesh? He's a Hindu god. He removes obstacles and makes journeys easier. Good cook, too. Shadow looked up. It's in the trunk, he said. I knew it was important, but I didn't know why. I thought maybe it meant the trunk of the tree, but he wasn't talking about that at all, was he? Mr. Nancy frowned. You lost me. It's in the trunk, said Shadow. He knew it was true. He did not know why it should be true, not quite, but of that he was completely certain. He got to his feet. I gotta go, he said. I'm sorry. Mr. Nancy raised an eyebrow. Why the hurry? Because, said Shadow, the ice is melting. Well, since it is later than I expected it to be, or not late, later than I planned on getting around to this, I might let this be a short reading because that was a short chapter, and the next one's going to be like a normal length. Yeah, longer chapter. So I think I'll save that for next time when it's a little bit earlier. Yeah, the next chapter is basically the last chapter. So, there's like a postscript after that. That'll probably read as well in one other reading. But since we're so close to the end and that was short and it's late, I'm going to stop here for tonight. And, yeah, that was a really short one, 12 minutes. So just to ease back into it, because I took a long break. I was having Oh, well, that's awesome. Thank you so much. I'm glad that you're, I'm glad you're enjoying it, even if you don't understand all of it. I'm sure it's not an easy book to understand if English is not your first language, because there's a lot of complicated and stuff and things that I don't even understand as a native English speaker. But I'm glad you're practicing. Yeah, it's always fun to learn a new language. Yeah, and I'm glad you're liking it. Sorry it was so brief, but hopefully you'll be on the next one or two, which are the last one or two. But yeah, I'm trying to get used to reading and projecting, broadcasting, doing voices, because I would like to get into doing voiceover work and stuff. I'm gonna be looking into that this year or next year. So I'm just trying to get comfortable with it first. See where it goes. But yeah, thanks. And I'll hopefully see you next time.